I've got over 200 plants in my home, and it's the monthly task that I do that keeps them in tip-top shape. So let me show you the things that I do and why, so that you can have thriving plants too. One of the most important things to get right with your plants is watering. If you underwater your plants, then they're going to turn into a limp, crispy mess. But then if you overwater your plants, then you're going to run into problems like root rot, and your plants will turn into a mushy mess. So how do we water our plants correctly? Well, the golden rule, as far as this channel is concerned, is to always check the soil before giving water. Never water to a schedule, because you just don't know how wet the soil of your plants are. If you add water, then you're going to be overwatering your plants. So how do we check if our plants need a drink? Well, there's a few options, and there's two that I like in particular. One option is to get your finger and go a good 2 or 3 inches into the soil, try and get to the kind of bottom half of the pot and just feel for moisture. If it feels moist or wet, then leave it a few days and check again. But a nice quick easy method that I've been using recently, I've got this fern here. I can get him out of his pot like so, and if he feels light as a feather, then he's in need of a drink. There's no water in here, there's no moisture in here. So this guy is feeling as light as a feather. So that means that he's pretty dry. So I like to bottom water most of my plants. So I'm going to add about 1/3 of the volume of the pot of water. So give him a good drink, pop the plant back on top, and then the water is going to wick up through the soil and all the roots are going to get an even hydration. You will find that certain plants will dry out much quicker than others, and you will have to check a bit more regularly. And that's exactly what I'm finding with this new plant of mine, my new Schismata glottis, which is a real mouthful to say. So this guy I recently bought online, and when I got him, I set him up into his new home. Then the next day, in the morning, I came down and all the leaves were basically on the floor. It was very, very thirsty. So I'm finding I'm having to water this guy probably every 5 or 6 days, something like that, which is more than the rest of my plants. So I'm just going to give this guy a check to see if he needs a drink. Right, so he's not light as a feather, but I can feel that he's a little bit light on moisture. So I'm just going to top him up while I'm here. Again, just add about 1/3 of the volume of the pot. So you might think that adding so much water to the pot like this is going to lead to overwatering, but the trick is to sit him in the pot, let him drink up what he wants, and then maybe check the next day for excess water in the pot. Just go in and check and then discard it if it's still there. So going around and feeling the weight of smaller plants is fairly easy, just to pick it up. This is a coleus that is looking quite small because I recently cut it back, and it's feeling quite light actually. So I'm going to top this up with another 1/3 of water into the pot and set that on top. But that was easy enough because it's quite a small plant. But if you've got a larger plant like this Anthurium clarinervium, which is looking a little bit ropey, not sure why, but I'm trying to rehab it, get it in this bright spot. But it's in a big pot, lots of soil. It's also got some stones on top, decorative stones. So it's going to be a bit of a pain in the bum to lift it up every time to fill the weight. So it's always a bit trickier. So the alternative then to check the soil is to get a moisture meter. One of my favorite things in the plant world. You can stick this into the soil, go quite deep. You want to go into the bottom half of the pot because that's where most of the moisture is going to be. And as you can see, it is reading moist on the moisture meter. So this will be another few days at least until this plant needs a drink. So that is checking and watering your plants. But the other thing that we have to get right is what is in our water. To really make your houseplants sing, you have to make sure that you're giving them their Weetabix. That means giving them a good houseplant fertilizer. So I use Houseplant Focus by Growth Technology. This is the one that I can get here in the UK. And I read the instructions for dosage for fertilizing every couple of weeks. And then I've halved that. And I make sure I add that to every single watering can that I make up. And that is so that I don't have to remember what I last fertilized when. So I just add fertilizer every time I water, but I make sure it's a diluted amount so it's not over fertilizing my plants. And you start getting into issues with yellow leaves and stunted growth and all that kind of stuff. But I use tap water, don't do anything to no reverse osmosis or anything like that. I can't really be bothered to use rainwater or to collect rainwater. So to treat my tap water, to get rid of chlorine, I use API stress coat or water conditioner, and that just immediately neutralizes the chlorine in my tap water, and it makes plants much healthier. The slow build-up of chlorine can be quite damaging to sensitive plants like calathea or peace lily or spider plants, and since using this stuff, it's really made a massive difference. So to make it easier to add droplets of this into this watering can, because you only need a little amount, I've got this little pipette that I've taken from Mrs. Sheffield. So I add to this large 6 litre watering can, that's about 6 to 8 drops, something like that. And then I fill it up. So I make a nice big batch, 6 litres. And then I've got my little 1 litre watering can, and I'll just add some of that into here. And I go off and water my plants. Just easier to water with a 1 litre watering can. One reason we prune, of course, is to get rid of diseased or dying leaves or leaves that are turning yellow. Because if a plant has lots of yellowing leaves on it, then it's going to be more susceptible for pests to jump onto the plant and take over. So I've got my my Anthurium here, which is a very nice plant. It's got a nice new leaf coming through, but for some reason it's developed this yellowing leaf, this single yellowing leaf. So when a plant develops one single yellow leaf, it's normally a sign that it's just aging and it's losing its oldest leaf, and hopefully that's the case here, or it could be a pest issue or something like that, but I've not really noticed anything on here. I've given it a good check over. So for this guy, just to tidy it up, make it look more respectable in my home and to avoid things like pests jumping in, I'm going to cut it off. So you want to go as near to the base of the plant as possible and cut off as much leaf tissue as you can. So that's the leaf there, and then that's the petiole. So I've taken the petiole right to the base of the plant and I've cut it right off. I've got a Philodendron Brazil down here on this bamboo shelving unit with a couple of grow lights over it, and it's developing a few browning leaves, and that is all my fault because I did overwater this plant. I gave it too much water for too long. It was just kind of sat in kind of saturated soil, which is not great for this plant. Quite susceptible to getting browning leaves if you overwater it. So to solve that problem, just a cheeky prune will be just the ticket. So I'm going to cut back on that stem piece there, like so, and actually that piece is on the same stem. So I've cut back the stem rather than just the leaf because I don't want to have a long stem piece missing leaves, so I'd rather just the plant regrow a new stem where I made the cut. The other reason we prune is for shape. So I've got my large jade plant which is growing some longer stems, and it's growing quite far away from the perimeter of the pot. So we can prune back this jade plant to kind of keep it in check, to stop it growing so wide. And when you cut the stem of a jade plant, and lots of other plants like a coleus or philodendron sometimes, they will produce more than one stem in replacement. So it will grow 2 new stems where you make the cut. They'll grow off. So you can get your sharp, clean pruners. You don't need to be too specific or too careful about where you cut because they always grow back plants. You can just go in and cut off pieces like so. Like I'm doing here, I'm just cutting back that larger stem piece there because it was growing quite lanky. So you can just go through, you don't need to be too careful about it. That's the beauty of plants, is that they will always grow back. So I always prune lots of my plants for shape, and this is a good way of keeping them in check. So once you've done that, you'll be left with lots of stem pieces like this. I'm going to show you what you do with these towards the end of the video. So here in my bright conservatory, I have this rather wonderful plant here. I got this guy from my plant unboxing video where I imported a load of plants from Asia, and this one is kind of thriving. This, would you believe, is a type of Monstera. It's a Monstera Peru. It's a variegated one, although it seems to be losing its variegation on the latest leaves, because I did cut it back. But anyway, as you can see, as I'm holding this plant, it's quite floppy. Now this guy, and pretty much most Monsteras I think, are climbers in their natural habitat. They kind of attach onto surrounding trees to climb up higher to reach the light. So this guy, it will be fine growing like this. It will just kind of flop about and it will continue to grow leaves, but it won't really thrive. So there is something we do to get this bad boy to thrive. This Monstera Peru, I'm going to support with a moss pole. So this is just a plastic cage that I got off Amazon, and I've pre-filled it with some sphagnum moss that I got from Botanica. So we're going to use that so the aerial roots of the Monstera Peru will start growing into the moss. It will strengthen the plant. It will grow bigger and bigger. That's the idea anyway. So the first thing to do is to get the plant out of the pot. I'm going to hopefully get this moss pole and plant to fit in this existing pot. I don't really want to upsize it. So I'm just going to knock off some of the soil. Not breaking any roots or anything like that. Okay, so this should all fit in nicely. So I've broken away pretty much all the soil. There's a nice healthy root structure here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to push that more towards the front of the pot. So I want the leaves facing me. And then, in fact, what I'll do, I'll get the moss pole in first, and then I'll put the plant in next to it. Now, filling around the pot with some soil to get it all snugly in there. The plant's nicely in now. You don't need to worry too much about the plant or the root system running out of space in the pot, because once the aerial roots start to grow into the moss, this will effectively become a bit of a pot for it, secondary pot system. So I'm now going to try and tie this onto the moss cage. So I've got some Velcro tape. So I'll probably just need a couple of pieces. So when you're tying the Velcro to the plant, just make sure that the Velcro you're tying on the stem and not the petiole or the leaf, like so. And I think that'll do it actually. Maybe just one more at the base just for extra support. Okay, so that is nicely tied on now. I can put it back into its decorative pot, like so. And that now looks like it belongs to this moss pole. So the aim of the game is to keep this moss nice and moist so that the aerial roots will successfully grow into it. It's always a bit of a challenge keeping moss moist, particularly in a moss pole. But I'm in the habit these days of just trickling through some water when it starts to dry out. You don't want it to dry out all the way, otherwise it becomes a real pain to hydrate. So just go through it and give it a good moisten, and that should trickle through to the bottom. And to give the pot a drink as well, just to settle the soil around the root ball. If you're seeing problems with your plants, like yellowing leaves, brown leaf tips and all the rest, and you're not really sure why, then make sure you download my free plant troubleshooting handbook that you can get with the link in the description. So I talked about the importance of watering our plants to keep them in tip-top shape, but nothing will bring down a burgeoning indoor plant collection quicker than an invasion of pests. So when I'm going around watering my plants, I'm also checking to see if I can see any unwanted visitors on my plants. So when I moved into this house, I decided to buy a few plants to fill it out with more plants. And in my local shop, I bought this rather nice Calafea, flowering Calafea, and this zebra plant, which is a beautiful foliage plant. Very nice, but you might be wondering why they're kind of sat on the floor like naughty children away from the rest of the collection here in my office. And that is because as I was watering my plants, I was doing my customary checks, and on these two bad boys, I spotted some aphids. So obviously, I brought home some aphids from the shop basically. I didn't do a thorough enough check in the shop, but it does happen really. It's quite hard to check in the shop there and then for all the bugs. And if there's one on there that you bring home, they tend to multiply, don't they, really quickly. So I've now been spraying these two with Plant Invigorator and Bug Killer, which is the pesticide that I use on my plants. It covers most houseplant pests, including aphids. So it's a concentrated solution that you put into this spray bottle, and then you just spray down your plants. That's what I've been doing for these guys. So you want to get in all the nooks and crannies and give it a good spray to kill off any pests on there. So that's the Calafea. And then the zebra plant, because nothing will bring down a collection quicker than a pest infestation. Aphids will suck the sap out of the leaf tissue, and then you'll start to see browning and yellowing leaves, which is never a good sign. Well, as I've been going around filming bits and pieces for this video, I just had a little closer look at this Calafea of mine. It's a relatively new plant. I just saw the new leaf coming through, and it looks like I've got aphids attacking this plant, which is a bit of a shame, but aphids are kind of one of the easier ones to get rid of. So they're all in there, all around that new leaf. And that's what aphids tend to do. They tend to attack the newer leaves, which may be why some of these leaves at the bottom are going a bit yellow. So I'm now armed with my spray bottle filled with Plant Invigorator and Bug Killer. So you just want to go through all the nooks and crannies of the plant and give it a good spray down. Okay, I've now given that a good spray. The next thing to do is isolate it from the rest of my collection, because I don't want the aphids spreading from this plant to my beloved Monstera. Something that's a really good idea to keep on top of is repotting plants. You don't want your plants to become so root bound that they're unable to draw up water and nutrients, and you start to see things like yellowing leaves and brown leaf tips and whatnot. So Monsteras are rapid growers, definitely in terms of roots anyway. And this one started to see the ramen noodle effect in the pot. All these roots at the bottom. So this guy could do with a bit of an upsize. And it's got area roots busting out of the side of the pot. And it feels quite crunchy. And when a plant dries out really quickly, even though you watered it a couple of days ago, that normally means that it's a bit too root bound because there's not enough soil in the pot to hold on to moisture. So I'm going to repot this guy and give you a few tips on on best practice. So as you can see, there's a whole lot of roots in here. Now generally, I don't tend to break up the root ball too much. I only really go in and just break up the really knotted parts, because that way they can find their way into the new pot. But you don't need to go too far and break it up too much. They will find their way eventually in the new pot. So there's a bit of a knotted piece there. If bits break off like that, then don't worry too much. They're more robust than you might think. Yeah, just untangle that one. That's all I'm going to do. Just the very bottom of the pot. There's a big old area root there. I'm actually going to trim that back, just to make it easier to repot. You can prune roots just fine, don't need to worry about that. Okay, so I've got my new pot here, and as you can see, it's about, I think that's probably 3 sizes bigger. The rules out there say they should only go 1 or 2 sizes bigger, but I like to break that rule sometimes because they grow very quickly and I don't want to have to repot again in 2 months or something. So just size it up. So I need some soil at the bottom. A couple of scoops. Maybe one more. Pat that down, size it up. Bit too much soil, I always put too much soil in. Like so. Now I'm aiming for the crown of the plant to be pretty much at the same place. I don't want to bury it or have it too proudly above the soil line. So that seems about right. So now it's just a case of filling the soil around the edges. So that is soil all nicely around the plant. And then as always, I'm going to give it a good drink. Even if I just gave it a drink yesterday, or even today, and I decided to repot, I would still give it a good drink because we've got new soil here in the plant. We want the plant to settle into its new environment, make good contact. So giving it a good drink like this will get rid of the air pockets that are lurking in the pot. And you'll probably see some depressions at the top. And that way, all the roots will have good contact in the new soil. I mentioned earlier that getting the watering right for our plants is one of the most important things we can do. But equally important is light. If plants aren't in good light, then they really are going to struggle. This is why I've got a bamboo shelving unit here with some plants with the Sansi grow light shining over them, because this spot is a bit of a darker spot. It's getting blocked, the light from the windows are getting blocked off by this wall, so it's not getting much natural light, so the grow lights are over there to supplement. But grow lights are only useful if the light can actually get to the leaf. I've got my Philodendron Brazil here, and I did some drilling for a recent chores video, and I put up this shelf with this plant. I did some drilling into that wall, and there was obviously a bit of dust I got everywhere, and it's fallen onto the leaves of this Philodendron Brazil, so there's some dusty leaves on here, and that means that the light is not able to penetrate to the leaf as effectively as it would if it was a clean leaf. So I have got my rather fetching pink cloth that I've dampened, just good old tap water, and I go through and just clean it off the leaves. The Ficus elastica is a plant that is always getting dusty. For some reason, these big leaves seem to be a magnet for bits of toenail and dead skin and all that kind of stuff. So this is a Ficus ruby, which has these kind of ruby-like leaves, a bit different to a Ficus elastica. So just looking over these leaves, and they are dusty. So I'm going to get my damp pink cloth, and I'm going to go through and give these leaves a good wipe like a good boy. Something that I'm in the habit of always doing is making sure that my plants are getting even light all around them. Otherwise we get lopsided growth, for most plants that is. There's a couple of plants that you don't really need to do that with, and I'll explain that in a bit. But I've got this Hoya here hanging on this burlap hanger on this little bracket unit here, and I've got a dedicated Sansi bulb shining right over it because it's in a bit of a darker spot here. The sun's getting blocked off by this wall. So if I was just to leave this here as it was all the time, then you're going to get lots of growth on this side where the light is, and on this side it's going to be a bit sparse because it's a bit darker. And you might also start to see a little bit of yellowing, maybe a bit of browning on this side as the leaves aren't getting the light that they need. This is a plant that needs a lot of light to grow. So a simple solution to that is to simply turn it around. Simple, I know, but it is effective. So I do that mainly probably every 3 or 4 weeks, something like that. Just give it a good rotate to allow even growth all around the plant. Any bushy plant you have will be ripe for a rotation. I've got my Schismata glottis here, and you'll notice that when you turn a plant that you've not turned for a while, you'll notice that it seems bushier. So it's quite bare on that side, and when I turn it around, it's a lot bushier. That's because all the leaves were kind of growing, leaning towards where the light is against the window. And then when you turn it around, it all faces the room. So over time, over the next couple of weeks or something, these leaves will start to face towards the light and I'll have to rotate it again. So I've got 3 calatheas down here that are quite new to me, but I am in the habit already of giving these a rotate. Nice beautiful green one here. I do rotate that. I rotate this one as well because a calathea is a bushy plant. So you want all sides of it to get good light so it doesn't all face in one direction. So that guy's already starting to face in one direction, so I'm going to give that a turn. But one plant, or there's a few plants actually that I don't rotate, and one of them in particular is the Monstera. Because a Monstera has basically a front and a back. The front where the leaves will grow out, and the back is where the aerial roots will grow. And it just looks much nicer if you have your Monstera up against a wall or something and just facing the light all in one direction so that all the leaves can face the room. And that's what's happening with this guy, this Monstera Thai constellation. All the leaves are facing that way where the light is coming from. I'm not rotating it. So you've seen me repot a couple of plants in this video, and I've also done some other repotting bits and pieces. And that often means that I'm left with a collection of dirty, crusty pots that need a good clean. It's always a good idea to keep your pots nice and clean. Just gets rid of any potential disease or pest issues that might spread from plant to plant. So I've filled up my sink here with soapy, warm water. Just used Fairy liquid, or Dawn dish soap it would be in the US. And all I do, just dunk my pots in and go in with a nice yellow scrubber and just give them a good clean. And this is the last one. So as you're doing this, it doesn't need to be spick and span, anything like that. Just get the worst of the crust stuff, and that should get rid of any disease or pest issues. All done. So I've got my leaves and stems that I cut off my jade plant earlier when I was showing you how to prune a plant. So I've got lots of these. And you don't want to chuck these away, throw them in the bin, because these will all turn into brand new life. And with the amount of cuttings I've got here, I could make, I don't know, 20, 30 plants, something like that. So let me show you. There's a couple of ways you can do it with a jade plant that are quite nifty. So we've got a stem piece like that, a stem with lots of leaves growing off. And what we want to do is remove the lower leaves as carefully as possible, as close to the stem as possible, without ripping the stem. So I'm going to take off 4 leaves, so you're left with a stem piece, like so, with 4 leaves at the top, and then these, where we've taken off the leaves, they're leaf nodes, and that's where the roots are going to grow. So new roots will grow from this stem once we put it into soil. So it's just a case of getting a little cup of soil like this, making a little hole, and then popping the jade into the middle. So jades root dead easily. I'd give that probably 3 weeks and that'll probably be rooted successfully in there. Just going to top it up with a little bit of water just to dampen the soil around that stem piece so they can start the root making magic. Just needs to go somewhere bright. So I'll pop that there. So you can do it with a larger piece like so. So I'm going to remove these 4 lower leaves. We remove the lower leaves so that they don't sit in the soil or water or perla, whatever you're using, and rot. That'll really seriously damage the health of the cutting. Just trim that back a bit. So I've got a larger piece here with 2 stems, more or less, where I've obviously pruned it before and it's branched out into 2 new stems, and that will successfully root as well. So you can use a bigger piece. I've got another little pot there. I'm going to pop it in like so. It's a bit top heavy, this one, so I'm going to have to press it around. Hopefully it will stay in position like so. Give it another little drink. That will anchor it as well, and then pop it there. So that is 2 new plants already, a bigger one that Probably put it into a bigger pot, to be honest, but I'm going to leave it in there for now. And a smaller one here. So once these roots start growing on, they'll eventually need to be up-potted into a pot that's bigger than that. So that's that. And then another little trick with jade plants, these leaves that we took off the stems, removed the lower leaves, these will grow roots as well and they'll develop into their own plants. It will take a long time. Before you start to see a new plant, it might take months, if not a year. But all you do is you just lay it on top of a saucer of soil like so, just making sure that the end section that you pulled off is making good contact with soil. Just lay it on like so, and then eventually you will get roots sprouting from the bottom here, and then a new plant will develop from the point there. So you can get as many as you like into this tray. So I've got a good 3, 6, 8 new plants plus these two, so I'm already up to 10. If I was to carry on going, I reckon I'd get 20 plants. So I'm just going to give this a little dribble of water. You don't want to give too much, don't want it sat in a swamp. Like so. Put that in a nice bright spot, and hopefully in a few weeks you'll start to see roots and leaves sprouting from both of these. Well, that's it for this video. For your next viewing pleasure, check out my monthly chores video series that you can get by clicking on the videos up here, and I'll see you there.